Sisters and brothers, welcome back to Purge, Purify, and Renew Your Mind. We thank you for rejoining us. This is part 2 of our timeless topic, so-called black people. We are not our worst enemy.
So how can we be justified in saying that we are our own worst enemy? And I'm just scratching the surface. How can we be justified in saying that we are our own worst enemy without looking at the evidence? Without going beneath and beyond the surface of our superficialities, without looking at root causes. Because what I'm trying to state now is root causes that show the root of our behavior, the roots of our twisted psychology. Just think over that. What about the so-called slave codes? What about the black codes? What about abortion, scars and spells and addiction? What about brainwashing of a people? What about Stockholm syndrome? What about social amnesia? And all these terms and words, they have definitions and meaning. I'm just stating the words or the concept. And we need to get into the actual meaning of these terms and how they are applied to us as a people, have been applied and still being applied to us as a people. Double consciousness. That's what Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, in his book, The Soul of Black People, he coined the phrase, he defined it in that book, double consciousness. We have a double consciousness, we double-mindedness. We don't have that single-mindedness, that unity consciousness, or the type of mind that that's stated in, I think, if I recall correctly, the book of Matthew, 6th chapter, 22nd verse, where it says, let thy eye be single. Let thy eye, the mind's eye. That's, once again, in a nutshell, that's saying know the truth. Because the knowledge of accurate knowledge and truth, seasoned with love, gives us that one-eyedness, I'm coining the word, that one single eye, that unity consciousness. It's like when you bring all the forces into harmony and it's concentrated into a point of truth, of knowledge and facts and evidence. That's the type of consciousness that I'm referring to. And an example of that, and I know most of us have seen it or experimented with ourselves, is like growing up. When you take a magnifying glass and you put it in the light of the sun and you move the magnifying glass in such a way that you have a piece of paper or grass underneath, that when you harness, what you're doing, you harnessing the rays of the sun, you concentrating them, you bring the rays of the sun into a oneness. And that harnessing and that oneness that concentrate the rays into a singleness where it burns the hole in the paper or it starts a fire in the grass. That's what I mean by unity consciousness or accurate knowledge of truth and evidence and facts. Last but not least, what about mental side? Dr. Bobby E. Wright, a psychiatrist among us who passed away in 1982, but he wrote a pamphlet. I don't have it before me right now, but he coined the word mental side. We know about genocide, we know about suicide and all kinds of CIDES sides, but he coined the word mental side. He defined the word mental side as the systematic and deliberate destruction of a people's or a person's mind for ultimate extermination. Think about that. Great psychologists, psychiatrists among us. One of the tops among us. He coined that word to identify and look at how what was happening with our psychology, and that psychology bringing forth a certain kind of behavior in us. And he, again, mental side is defined as the systematic, and deliberate destruction of a person or people's mind for ultimate extermination. That's in effect right now, whether we conscious of it or not, whether we see it or not, but it's happening. What about sharecropping scars, addiction and spell? What about Jim and Jane Crowism, chain gang scars and addiction and spell? What about mass incarceration right now today? Dr. Michelle Alexander wrote a book a few years ago called The New Jim Crow, in the age of so-called color blindness. And that's what it dealt with in an extraordinary way. Of mass incarceration. Check the book out. Look at the book. Buy it. Purchase it. Go to your local library. And as a matter of fact, they probably don't have it here in the backwoods of Greenville and Delta, Mississippi. But you can get it. It's still available. Mass incarceration. Think over that. Just on that alone, how is it possible that we are our own worst enemy? It's not possible. And as I stated in the beginning, this is not a denial of what we are doing to ourselves on the surface, but it's not the root cause just within ourselves. Something has happened, and something is still happening. That's where I'm leading to. That's where I'm pointing to check out the evidence, do the homework, do the research. Don't just simply believe something because it looked like it. Don't just look at the symptoms. The symptoms are not the causes. Then make the statement, because out of frustration, I'm frustrated too, in one degree or another. We are a people. Your pain is my pain. My pain should be your pain. When we pain, and we all pain and hurting and suffering. That's the way it goes. That's the way it is, whether we accept it or not. So don't be quick, out of frustration, to put a blanket on us as a people, or some of us, and say that we are our own worst enemy. Not true. That's the position I would take. That's the position that I am taking. And that position is compelled by doing some of the homework, doing some of the research, sitting in quiet meditation and reflection and contemplation, and observing myself and others of our ethnic group. Because we yearn for happiness. We yearn for betterment. We yearn for peace. We yearn for prosperity. It's natural. But we have been skillfully manipulated. In a summarized way, it's called technology. But anyway, what about the child support system? I won't get into that. I just state the point. Child support system. That's scars. That's addiction. That's applied to us. Someone profit and benefit from it. What about drug scars? All forms of drugs. What about social engineering, social condition scars? As I stated again, what about robbed of the root knowledge of ourselves, scars and addiction? I mean, we can go on and on, but that's the main point of this episode that I hope I did some justice to, with the position that we are not our own worst enemy. And if you feel we are, then bring forth the evidence, bring forth your facts, bring forth your research, bring forth your evidence. But just stating it that we are our own worst enemy because that's what you feel, that's what you believe, and out of your hurt, your personal hurt and pain and frustration, I understand. We understand. But we are not our own worst enemy. So as I wrap up this episode, I'm reminded of Dr. Maulana Karinga. This is a quote. He said, "Until we break the monopoly that the oppressor has on so many of our minds, liberation is not only impossible, it's inconceivable." How can we conceive liberation and salvation when the oppressor or an oppressor has the monopoly on so many of our minds, on our thinking, on the images in our minds, on our belief system, on our relationships, on our family structures and institutions, monopolize our economics, has monopolized our aspiration politically, educationally, intellectually, and so forth and so on. Wow. And last but not least, I didn't mention it, but I see it before me now. The King Alfred plan. Research that. I think it was a black author in the I think the 60s. He wrote a book called The Man Who Cried I Am. And in that book he made mention of what was supposed to be, it's controversial. Some people say no, it's not true. Some say it is true. But the King Alfred plan was supposed to be a CIA-led scheme supporting international effort to eliminate black people of African descent. And it was first stated in that book, The Man Who Cried I Am, by John Williams. And don't forget the COINTEL program. Don't forget the COINTEL program. When there was a war on black organizations, black leaders all over the country, assassinations, schemes by the FBI and J. Edgar Hoover. Did I say J. Edgar Hoover? I mean J. Edgar Hoover. I'm sorry. Wow, man. I have to laugh to myself, but I apologize if I offended someone. If I said J. Edgar Hoover. He was gay, wasn't he? I mean, but his name was J. Edgar Hoover. Okay, I'm sorry. But anyway, we're going to bring this to an end, and what I say is think on these things, brothers and sisters. Ponder these things. And there's always more to say. And here I have before me, as I'm still closing out around, summarizing and bringing this episode to an end. Dr. King informed us that as long as the mind is enslaved, the body can never be free. I mean, ponder over these quotes. As long as the mind is enslaved, the body can never be free. If the mind is enslaved, how can the body do the things of a free thinking man and woman, or woman? If the mind is enslaved, the body is going to do things or express the condition or the dominant condition of that mind, of that psychology. So the statement is true that as long as the mind is enslaved, the body can never do the things of a free thinking man or woman. That's another trick. And some of us internalize that, and we may say, some of us, speaking of other members of our family, is, why they doing that? Why everything that we try to do, some of us try to tear it down. And then we begin to blame ourselves for the problem. Once again, in a summarized way, we are still saying that so-called black people, some of us, or as a people as a whole, we are our own worst enemy, and that's not true. Steve Biko, the South African freedom fighter who was assassinated, once said, the most potent or powerful weapon of the oppressor or any oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. If an oppressor has our minds, or any group of people's minds, that's their most powerful weapon. It's not their guns, their tanks, their missiles. It's not that. If they have the minds of the oppressed, of an oppressed people, and we have internalized oppression, and it appears before us as to some of us that we are our own worst enemies. It appears because we have internalized oppression, inferiority. We have internalized it. So-called white superiority and black inferiority, both are myths, but they function, operate in everyday life as a truth. They have consequences. But white superiority and black inferiority, both are myths. But the way they function and operate socially, politically, economically, intellectually, and so forth and so on, as a truth. Think over that. Dr. King, again, rarely do we find men and women who willingly engage in hard, solid thinking. There is an almost universal quest for easy answers and half-baked solutions. Nothing pains some people, says Dr. King, more than having to think. Our minds are constantly being invaded by legions of half-truths, prejudices, and false facts. One of the great needs of mankind or humankind, says Dr. King, is to be lifted above the morass of false propaganda. Wow, false propaganda. Brothers and sisters, as I stated again, with all that being said, Brother Franklin Jones, in this book here, powerful book, and I one out of many that I request that we should have like 10 days ago and have read it and have a conversation about it. The name of this powerful, most revealing book is The Black People's Matrix by Franklin Jones. And you can order this book. And all of what I and more that I tried to say or express in this episode, he states it and bring forth evidence and truthful facts to that point. Powerful book, must have. But he says, it's a quote, it is an insidious yet very sophisticated method of control that conditions America's black population to accept so-called white dominance over their lives by misleading them to believe that they are now themselves our own worst enemies. This is the same psychological warfare technology used by the U.S. government against foreign adversaries. It was decided to secretly use it to domestically defend the so-called white racist position of power and dominance against black people. That's Franklin Jones. That's just one paragraph out of that book, The Black People's Matrix. But in closing, I know you say this man said closing, but he's still talking. But I am closing at this time. A few quotes in my closing. Henry David Thoreau, a European essayist and poet and philosopher, said, "We must learn to reawaken and keep ourselves awakened." That's true for us as a people. This person, Wallace Rosenthal, and what I'm reading here is some alleged quote made by him, and you can find it on YouTube and other sources. But he said, quote, "Our greatest power over blacks is that we control everything they believe. We control their education, their news media, their entertainment, all their statistics, and even their image of themselves." Wow. This therefore allows us to inundate blacks with disinformation designed to instill the myth of white superiority and black self-hatred into their minds. He says, lastly, it's a psychological warfare program used for protecting people who define and classify themselves as whites. Wow. Everything must change. Nothing stays the same. Everyone will change. No one stays the same. The young becomes the old, and mysteries do unfold, because that's the way of time. Nothing and no one goes unchanged. There are many things in life you can be sure of, except rain comes from the clouds, sun lights up the sky, and hummingbirds do fly. Winter turns into spring. A wounded heart will heal, but never much too soon. Yes, everything will change. The young becomes the old, and mysteries do unfold, because that's the way of time. Nothing and no one goes unchanged. Do not believe in anything simply because you have heard it. Do not believe in anything simply because it is spoken and rumored by many. Do not believe in anything simply because it is found written in your religious books. Do not believe in anything merely on the authority of your teachers and elders. Do not believe in traditions because they have been handed down for many generations. But after observation and analysis, when you find that anything agrees with reason and is conducive to the good and benefit of one and all, then accept it and live up to it. Ann Landers once said, the newspaper columnist, "The naked truth is always better than the best dressed lie." An African proverb says, "Not to know is bad, not to want to know is worse." Brother James Baldwin said, who wrote the book The Fire Next Time and many other novels, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. And in closing, every shut eye isn't closed, and every goodbye isn't gone. Peace and love.